In 1940, the Germans planted their flag on French soil, and there they held on with an iron fist. Among the most prominent military men in that campaign was Helmut Kämpfe, a highly decorated soldier who made a name for himself in the Third Reich, fighting against the Russians on the Eastern Front. When he was sent to France, Kämpfe was brutal, ordering mass executions and torture of civilians. However, his infamous career came to an equally sadistic end in 1944, when the French rebel forces caught him and subjected him to a summary trial in which he was found guilty. In this installment of military history, we will narrate the crimes of this German major, but also his execution marked by fire, desperate screams, and a revenge so savage that it even surprised the Reich authorities. Let's begin. Helmut Kämpfe was born in Thuringia, Germany, in 1909, just in time to be raised during the beginning of the First World War. Following in his father's footsteps, he trained to be a typographer. But in 1933, Hitler's rise to power completely changed the mind of the young man of just 24 years. He enlisted in the force and soon demonstrated remarkable ability and obedience, quickly becoming a lieutenant in the Heer, the German land army. After a period of great achievements there, he was transferred to the Waffen-SS in 1939 as part of the Third Reich's preparations for the invasion of Poland. Once World War II began, Kämpfe stood out for his loyalty to the Führer and for his great tactical ability. At that time, Germany's military power seemed to have no rival throughout the European continent. The advance of troops was incessant, and new territories were annexed practically daily.
The German invasion of France, Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands started on the 10th of May 1940 and became known as the Battle of France. Paris, the French capital, fell to the Germans on the 14th of June 1940. For his successes during the Battle of France, Kämpfe was promoted to SS Obersturmführer at the end of January 1941.
Once the flag was planted on French soil, Kämpfe was sent to the Eastern Front, where the Reich's troops were battling with powerful Russia. There, he came to command the 3rd Battalion of the 4th SS Panzer Grenadier Regiment, which was in charge of the reconnaissance group of the 2nd SS Division Das Reich. His achievements on the battlefield indicate that he was an all-round soldier who knew how to earn the admiration of his peers, but also of his superiors. The affection that his colleagues had for him will be fundamental to understanding the motivations behind a savage massacre that was carried out in the name of this soldier. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. As a testament to his ability, Kämpfe was awarded the Iron Knight's Cross for his bravery and exemplary leadership fighting in the Dnieper-Carpathian Offensive in the winter of 1847-1943. It is an award that only 98 other German soldiers earned during the Third Reich, which gives an accurate perspective of how important this guy was to Hitler's deadly empire. Interestingly, the greatest award he received in his career came from his participation in one of Germany's biggest failures during World War II. The Dnieper-Carpathian Offensive was a series of operations carried out by Ukrainian and Belarusian partisans seeking to drive the Reich from their lands. The central objective was to split up the Wehrmacht's army group south and dislodge German forces and their Romanian and Hungarian allies from most of the territories of Ukraine and Moldova, which were still occupied by Axis forces. It was one of the largest offensives of the war, stretching along a 1,000-kilometer front and involving almost 3.5 million soldiers. Among these, Soviet troops played a key role.
After an opening attack across a 300-kilometer front, Soviet troops advanced from 80 to 200 kilometers and nearly liberated all of Kiev and Zhytomyr regions, along with the regions of Vinnytsia and Rivne.
In the course of the operation, 20 Wehrmacht divisions were destroyed, disbanded, or had to be withdrawn from the front for rebuilding, while another 60 were reduced to less than half their theoretical strength. Even worse were the equipment losses, with thousands of precious tanks, assault guns, artillery pieces, and trucks destroyed, mostly by being left in the frozen winter mud. According to German General Kurt von Tippelskirch, this was the Wehrmacht's biggest defeat since Stalingrad. Yet in that chaotic context, Helmut Kempfe proved to be a capable leader who ended up filling the roles of his superiors, who were completely outnumbered by the enemy. Now, fast forward to the spring of 1944, when the protagonist of this video was in command of the Das Reich Division. Kempfe's men had been withdrawn from Russia and sent to southern France to re-equip in preparation for the anticipated Battle of Normandy in Nazi-occupied Europe. During his stay on French soil, Kempfe was ordered to begin operations against the Maquis, rural guerrillas, who, according to German intelligence reports, were operating in the bushes of the region ambushing German units. The work was brutal. Under Kempfe's command, mass executions were carried out, and innocent civilians were persecuted just for being suspected of collaborating with these mysterious Maquis.
SS Major General Heinz Bernhard Lammerding issued orders for the division to break the spirit of the population by making examples and cleanse the area around Clermont-Ferrand of partisans. That same day, members of the 2nd SS Panzer Division Das Reich, which was commanded by Kempfe, had displayed what cleansing of partisans would mean. In retaliation for killing 15 Germans, soldiers of Das Reich hanged 99 male inhabitants of the village Toul.
In retaliation for an offensive by French partisans, a group of Das Reich elements arrived in Tula on June 9, 1944, forcing the resistance to evacuate the town. With the rebels gone, civilians were at the mercy of the Nazis. After savagely beating men between the ages of 16 and 60, troops led by Kempfe hanged 99 inhabitants as a sign of their fury and disregard for the lives of others. In the following days, another 149 inhabitants of Tula were deported to the extermination camp at Dachau, where 101 of them died. In total, the crimes perpetrated by the Germans resulted in 213 civilian victims in that small town. Resentment against Helmut Kempfe grew steadily, as he was the public face of the disaster and was held responsible for the deaths of so many people. It was only a matter of time before the fury of the French fell upon the decorated Nazi. That is why, on the night of June 9, 1944, Helmut Kempfe was ambushed and captured 4 kilometers east of Saint-Léonard-de-Noblat by a unit led by Sergeant Jean Canu, a member of a communist militant group of the Maquis of Limousin. Canu handed him over to his superior, Colonel Georges Guingouin, who was known for being inflexible and brutal with the prisoners of war of the Third Reich. The next day, Kempfe was executed on the orders of the French, but his death was not just another one on the list of executions of the Second World War. For the owner of the Knight's Cross, the French had something special in mind. Thus, the German criminal was placed inside an ambulance along with other captured Germans. They were tied up tightly so that they could not escape. They thought they were going to be riddled with bullets. But within minutes, the vehicle was doused with petrol and set alight by French rebels who cheered their victory. It all happened in front of a cheering crowd as the flames consumed the men, Their cries of pain and pleas fell on deaf ears.
Though the exact circumstances remain unclear, according to a French informant, the 34-year-old Kämpfer and captured Wehrmacht soldiers were burned alive in a captured German military ambulance in front of an audience.
The brutality with which Kämpfer was eliminated is proof of the hatred that existed between the two peoples and the lack of respect for human integrity that World War II brought with it. Strange as it may seem, executions like those of this decorated major were not a rarity. In fact, the French resistance managed to carry out several successful attacks despite the enemy's numerical and armament superiority. Even today, the confrontations that these partisan groups had with the Third Reich continue to be discovered, as well as some of the dark crimes that were committed in the name of liberation. For example, in 2023, Edmond Rivet, then 98 years old, revealed himself to be the last survivor of a local branch of the FTP resistance group, an acronym for French snipers and partisans. He also declared that he witnessed the mass execution of completely defenseless German prisoners in a remote wooded place called l'Avare. In his statement, Rivet described how his detachment of 30 fighters were escorting the prisoners through the countryside east of the community of Toul when they received the order to kill them. The commander of the resistance unit, codenamed Hannibal, cried like a child when he received the order because he did not want to shoot prisoners. But there was discipline among the French elements, so the order was obeyed. All the prisoners were eliminated, breaking with international law that provides for the humane treatment of prisoners who offer no resistance to authority.
Difficile à dire à revivre. Chaque maquisard tuait son bonhomme. Sauf ceux qui ne voulaient pas, quoi. D'abord, il fallait les nourrir, il fallait s'en occuper, on ne pouvait pas les garder. C'est bien pour ça qu'ils ont été fusillés.
Rivet, whose wartime codename was Papillon, or butterfly in French, kept the secret for 75 years, even from his family. However, in 2023, he provided incredible details. It was a terribly hot day. We forced them to dig their own graves. They were killed, and we poured quicklime on them. I remember it smelled of blood. We never spoke of it again. It was these armed uprisings and summary executions like those Rivet recalls, which incited the indiscriminate slaughter of civilians by the infamous Helmut Kämpfe. You can see how in war, everything is connected, and the misfortunes and miseries of one side always end up influencing the savage response of the other. To be burned to death in plain sight was too much of a humiliation for a high-ranking leader. Such an offense was not going to be overlooked by the Führer's troops. When it was discovered that the highly decorated officer had been kidnapped and possibly executed, troops from the Das Reich division and members of the pro-German French militia began a brutal search for Kämpfe in the surrounding area. Later, troops from the 1st Battalion Das Reich arrived at a small town called Oradour-sur-Glane, a rural community where French partisans were suspected to be located. There were no signs of rebels there, but the Germans were bloodthirsty and eager to vent their anger over Kämpfe's death. It was then that they committed one of the most savage massacres of the time. On June 10, 1944, in the Haute-Vienne department of the Limousin region, German soldiers began a hunt for defenseless civilians. The day began with the mass abduction of men and women for interrogation at gunpoint in order to discover Kämpfe's whereabouts. Since the vast majority did not even know who the German soldier was, the result was an unprecedented carnage. The SS soldiers rounded up the entire population and took them to the market square, so that no one could slip through their fingers. Then, they separated the inhabitants by gender, including the youngest ones. Members of the 1st and 2nd platoons took 197 adult men to different granaries on the outskirts of the town to lock them up. Meanwhile, the 3rd platoon did the same with 240 women and 205 children who were placed inside the community chapel. Next, the SS soldiers set fire to the granaries and threw bombs through the church windows, shooting those who tried to escape the flames. It was a criminal act that killed hundreds of people in a few minutes. After more than 600 inhabitants had died, the soldiers stole their belongings amid laughter and jokes. Let us listen to the testimony of Robert Hebra, one of the few young Frenchmen who managed to flee the place during the arrival of the German forces.
Las SS bajaron por allá. De cada lado de la calle había un hombre de las SS. Ordenaban a la gente salir de sus casas, daban órdenes. Y los soldados se llevaban a la gente del pueblo.
For a long time, there were records of 642 people killed in the Oradour-sur-Glane massacre, with 190 men shot, 245 women, and 207 children machine-gunned and burned in the church. These figures are equivalent to almost all the people present in the town, so it was practically a genocide on a regional scale. In 2019, after anthropological investigations, the 643rd victim was identified, thanks to the work of Professor David Ferrer-Revel. It was the Aragonese Ramona Dominguez Gil, who also succumbed to machine gun fire. The town also saw most of its buildings and infrastructure destroyed after its looting and burning, leaving it completely in ruins. The few survivors escaped by hiding in Munch Abbey, which had a moat and a drawbridge. The monks helped a group of mothers and their children, as well as 6 Jews, to escape through the drain, which was almost 800 meters long, in total darkness. After the end of the war, the ruins of the village were kept in that state by order of the French government of Charles de Gaulle, as a reminder of this crime and of the suffering caused by the Nazi occupation, becoming a symbol, like other European villages subject to similar attacks such as Lidis or Marzabotto. The testimony of the few surviving victims allowed a reconstruction of the events. Among them, Robert Hebra was one of the most important, since he was only an 18-year-old boy at the time his community was attacked. His memories were vital to understanding what happened in that village. Bear in mind that practically all the inhabitants were executed, and those who survived were deeply traumatized, unable to put their torment into words.
Aquí colocaron sus armas, 2 ametralladoras. La mayoría se encontraba aquí, en el centro del granero. Yo estaba mucho más atrás, junto al muro. Entonces hubo una detonación. Era un fusilamiento. Mataron a todos.
However, the death or disappearance in subsequent combat of most of the soldiers who participated in the massacre has fueled different theories about why they chose to vent their pent-up rage over Kempfa's kidnapping in that very specific village. There was no indication of the presence of the German soldier or the collaboration of the locals in its execution. Most likely, the Oradour-sur-Glane massacre was entirely motivated by revenge, with no other purpose than the shedding of French blood. Although the Germans were savages, the attack on that community had been carried out without any kind of planning or prior order from the High Command. Such a deployment of elements and the expenditure of hours, weapons, and personnel in such a petty revenge was totally condemned by several Reich officials. That is why the commander of the 4th SS Panzergrenadier Regiment, SS Standartenführer Sylvester Stadler, ordered a court-martial to be held over the massacre. At that trial, SS Sturmbannführer Adolf Dieckmann, commander of the 1st Battalion of the 4th Panzergrenadier Regiment, and a personal friend of Kempfe, was accused of being primarily responsible for the murders. To justify his crime, he said that during the search, he had found Kempfe's body handcuffed inside a field ambulance with the remains of other German soldiers outside the village of Oradour-sur-Glane. The vehicle had been set on fire, so its occupants had been intentionally burned alive. After seeing the fate of his friend, the village was destroyed on his orders. SS Brigadeführer Heinz Lammerding, commander of the Das Reich Division, agreed to let Dieckmann face a court-martial, but this was put on hold due to the war needs of the Reich. All charges were eventually dropped when the accused was killed fighting in the Battle of Normandy on 29 June 1944. Over time, the French also joined in the investigations into what happened on that infamous day in 1944. The so-called Oradour-sur-Glane trial, held by the Military Tribunal of Bordeaux in January 1953, created a deep division in French society, and its resolution became a matter of state. Plagued by certain deficiencies due to its complexity, the trial was conducted amid great controversy, as it was carried out in the absence of the main responsible officers of the unit, who were either dead or on the run.
In Bordeaux, the last chapter is written to a story of war. The story of the village of Oradour-sur-Glane. These are the men whose chapter it is. They stand accused by France of aiding the murder of 642 people who lived in the village.
A new trial was opened in 1983 by the Justice of the German Democratic Republic against Obersturmführer Heinz Barth, head of one of the company's sections, and tried in absentia in Bordeaux, who was sentenced to life imprisonment but later released for health reasons, without any new information being provided or any information already known being revised. General Heinz Lammerding, head of the Das Reich Division and tried for the Tula episode, committed the day before the Oradour episode, died in 1971 in West Germany after having led a successful business career, benefiting from the legal framework that prevented his extradition, unsuccessfully requested by the French justice system. Helmut Kempfe's career was as distinguished as it was grim. During his campaigns in Europe, he spread death and destruction throughout the territories in which he carried out operations. The most incredible thing is that even after his terrible death, his name remains a banner of hatred, and it was in his memory that German soldiers eliminated an entire community. Although history has relegated Helmut Kempfe to being a footnote in the great narratives of the Second World War, the truth is that this man was an important participant in the horror of the Third Reich. This way we come to the end of the video. If you like this content and want to continue discovering the most fascinating facts and characters of the 20th century, we invite you to subscribe and activate notifications for this channel. That way you can stay up to date with all our news. Without further ado, we say goodbye until the next installment of Military History. Thank you for joining us.